Hey guys, Mr. Wiz here. Welcome back to my channel. We've got another exciting lesson for you guys today. Today we're going to be looking at loops, specifically what they are, how to use them, etc. Since we've been working with projectile games here recently, I'm then going to show you how to use the loops to make a pretty common style projectile game similar to Space Invaders or Galaga, where you have multiple enemies at the top of the screen. That's what we're going to be using loops for today. So before we get started, as always, make sure you are signed in and you see your picture or initials in the top right corner there. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project, and I'm just going to call this project Space Invaders. It's always a good idea to name your project based on what you are making so you can quickly find it later on. So first things first, what are loops? Loops are essentially a way that a programmer simplifies their program. There's a phrase that I like to use in my class a lot. I like to say that a good coder is a lazy coder. What I mean by that is that a good programmer will often look for ways to simplify their code so they don't have to work as hard to do something that takes a lot more detail. So loops allow you to simplify your program. Basically, what loops are is when you have something in your code that you are using multiple times in a row at the same time, in the same part of your code, you're doing the same actions over and over and over again. Loops simplify the amount of code that you need to actually write. So it can save you sometimes a lot of time depending on what you're doing. So let's look at the blocks that are available. In the loop section, you have several loop blocks here. We've used pause before, but these other ones I don't think we have used. So the forever block is a type of loop block that plays throughout the entirety of the game. Whatever you put in there will repeat over and over again for the whole game, starting at the beginning and going all the way to the end. I'll be honest, I don't use this block a lot in my games because I don't have a lot of code that I want to repeat over and over again for the entirety of the game. The main thing that I use the forever block for is background music. So let me show you how we can do that. I've shown you guys in the past these two music blocks here, right? So this one is for writing your own music in a very detailed way, and you can write it as long as you want to. And the melody block is for short, simple melodies. So if I was to put this in the on start, I could create a simple melody or use one from the gallery like this one. And I could choose until done in background or looping in background. So looping in background works fine, but it's a very short melody to repeat over and over and over again. You might get really tired of that, right? So what if you wanted your melody to be longer, but you didn't want to go through the complicated aspect of writing the music using this block, which is where you're actually creating notes and you're adding measures, and it's a lot of work, right? So if you didn't want to go that technical, if you want to keep it simple, but you wanted to make it longer, this is a great use of the forever block. I can put this in my forever block. Instead of looping in background, I can have until done. And then I just put another one after it with a different melody. Or you know what? I actually like this melody, so maybe I want this melody to play twice. And then, I didn't mean to do that. And then after the plays 2 times, I can change the melody to a different melody. So after it plays Mystery twice, maybe I'll have it play Falling once. Let's see what that sounds like now. That was the first. Now it's playing the second time. Now it's playing the third melody again. Now it's going back and starting over, right? So I could essentially create a longer song this way. And keep in mind, I don't have to use the pre-made stuff. I can also edit it. Maybe I don't like that first note. And maybe I want to create a new one after that, which is something even different. So like I can make this song however long I wanted to make it. And what's going to happen is because it's in a forever block, it will play through the whole thing from start to finish, and it won't restart until it gets to the end. So I can actually make a longer musical piece for my game without getting super complicated and using notes and measures and quartered notes and all that jazz, right? So now I've got playing 4 different things, and then it will repeat and finishes those 4 things. That's not bad. For something I just threw together, that's not bad. And it's much longer than if I just used the one. So Forever Block is a great way to do that for longer music. I don't use it for many other things in my games, just simply because there's not a lot of stuff that I would want to repeat over and over and over again for the entirety of the game. Let's look at the other blocks. There's a regular repeat block. This one is pretty straightforward, where it repeats a certain number of times, whatever number of times you tell it to use. This is the block I probably use the most when it comes to loops. Then down here we have a while block. That looks a little familiar, doesn't it? That little diamond shape, where have we seen that before? Hopefully in the last video when we learned about logic, right? So this is basically a loop that is also a logic, where instead of saying if something is true, which is what we used the logic for, when we said if something is true, then do the action, the while block means that the loop will continue over and over and over again as long as whatever we put inside there is true. So that's kind of an interesting one. There's a lot you can do with that. So you can have something repeat only when a condition is in place. All right, so for what we're doing, we're going to be using this block. But before we do that, let me talk about what we're creating. What I want to create with you guys here today is something similar to Space Invaders or Galaga, where there's a bunch of enemies at the top of the screen, right? So normally I would do that by creating my sprite. I'm just going to go ahead and pick one here. What do I want to use? Maybe we'll do an attack of the ducks. So I'll use a duck sprite here. So I've got a duck sprite, and right now when he spawns in the middle of the screen, but I want there to be a whole bunch of ducks, basically a few rows of them, up at the very top of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and set its position of the first duck. And what size is this duck? This duck is 16 by 16. I want to be in the top left corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move him over. Instead of using 0, 0, because if it's at 0, 0, he's actually off the screen a little bit, as you guys can see there, because it measures from the middle of the duck. So instead, let's set its position to half of 16, which is 8. So I'm going to set its x to 8 and its y to 8. And that should put it in the top left corner. There it is. So I've got my first duck there, but I want there to be a row of ducks, a row of angry ducks that I'm going to try to fight in my game, right? So if I was to do this without loops, I would have to continue making more and more ducks and setting more and more positions, depending on how many ducks I'm creating. And that could end up being a lot of code. Let's say I wanted there to be 7 ducks across, and I want there to be 4 rows of them. Well, 7 times 4, that's 28 ducks that I would have to code. That's a lot of blocks that I would have to be coding right now for these ducks. So instead of doing that, we're going to use logic. I'm sorry, not logic. We're going to use loops. And then we're also going to use a little bit of math. Not a lot, so don't freak out. We're going to be looking at addition is what we're going to be looking at. So here we go. Let's get started. I'm going to put a loop block on here to repeat however many times. How many did I say? I said I wanted 7 across, right? So let's do 7. So 7 times, I'm going to create 7 of these ducks. Now, when my program starts, it doesn't look like I have 7 ducks there. I did put a repeat 7. How come I only see 1 duck? Look at my code. Look at what I have on the screen there. Why do you think I'm only showing 1 duck instead of 7 ducks? Do you guys see it? I give you a hint. It has to do with this position right here. So I created 7 ducks, but I gave them all the same position. So right now we can't see 7 because they're all on top of each other. We put down 1 duck, then another, then another, then another, then another, and you don't see them because they're all in the same spot. So in addition to looping, this is why I said I need to do a little bit of math, right? I need each duck to move a little bit, okay? So here's how I'm going to do that. I need the X position and, well, actually right now just the X position. We'll talk more about the Y position later. I need the X position to change. I need it to change. How can I do that? I want you to think back. This is several videos ago. So think back. One of the first things we learned about in this class was how to make, what do we call something that changes in a computer program? What was the term that we use for something that changes? Remember how we watched that Raiden video and we talked about the things on there that were changing? What did we call that? Something that changes. Do you remember? If you don't, it's okay. It has been a little while. We call that a variable. So what we need to do is we need to create a variable for the X position, because every time it creates a new duck, we need that X position to change. So down here in the variables, we're going to click on it. We're going to make a new variable. I'm just going to call this XPOS to stand for X position. That's a little abbreviation, XPOS. So I'm creating a new variable called XPOS. In the very beginning, the first duck is going to have a position of 8, because that's what puts it in the corner there. So I'm going to grab the set XPOS, and I'm going to put this on my onStart. I'm going to set it to 8. So at the beginning of the program, it's going to be set to 8, and then I'm going to put that bubble where it says position. So now I'm setting my X position to 8, and when it runs the program, it's going to make the duck, and it's going to set it at that position of 8. Now, so far, nothing's changed in my game. They still are all in the same position because the variable hasn't changed, right? The variable is still set to 8 the whole time. Here's what I need to happen. After it creates the first duck, before it repeats and creates the second duck, I need the variable to change. So I'm going to go to variables, and remember there are 2 blocks here. There's one to set, and there's one to change. Now I could actually do this 2 different ways. I could do this. I could use the set and grab a math block in there to have the variable add a certain number to it. I could do that, but I don't have to do that, because I could also just use the change block. Remember we talked about the change block is for adding and subtracting. If we were doing anything other than adding and subtracting, I would want to use the math blocks probably. But change will work for adding or subtracting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it right here. So after it sets the first duck and it sets the position for the first duck, we're going to change that position by a certain amount. So how far to the right do we want the next duck to appear? Well, our duck is 16 pixels wide. So I'm going to move the next duck 16 pixels to the right. So let's look at what happens in our program. And there we go. Look at that. I've got 7 ducks in a row. I didn't have to code 7 ducks. I only needed to code the 1 duck, create the variable, and tell it to change 7 times. So now I have 7 ducks in a row. Pretty cool. Now, I said earlier that I wanted 4 rows of 7 ducks, right? So now let's talk about how to create the next row. Basically, I need this whole loop, this repeat 7, I need this whole loop to repeat itself 4 times to make 4 different rows. So that means I'm putting a loop around this loop. I'm going to put this whole repeat 7 loop inside of a repeat 4 loop, because I need it to do this 7 times. Now, here's my problem. Whoop, I have way too many ducks. It repeated it, but it kept going to the right. It didn't go down. Let's look at that again. So before we repeat it 7 times, we need something to change. I'm sorry, before we repeat this 4 times, we need something to change. What do we need to change between this first row of ducks and the second row of ducks? Think about that. What do we need to change between the first row of ducks and the second row of ducks, which is going to appear below it? What is the only difference between the first row of ducks and the ducks that are going to appear below it? The difference is the position, right? But what specifically? If we're moving it down, what are we changing? We are changing its Y position. Its Y position. So we're going to create a new variable for YPOS, Y position. I'm going to put the YPOS inside of where it says Y is 8. And I'm going to put a set YPOS at the top of this code here to set it at 8 at the beginning. So that shouldn't change anything yet. Should still look the same. So we're good. So what we needed to do is we needed to, when it finishes this first row of 7, before it repeats 4 more times, we need to change its Y. So I'm going to go into variables, and I'm going to change the Y position, and I'm putting it after the repeat 7. but inside the repeat 4. Do you guys see that? So the repeat 7 here, the repeat 4 is here. We're putting it after it repeats, after it finishes the first row, basically, is what we're saying. We need the Y position to change. How much do we need to change by? Well, this guy's 16 pixels tall, so let's move it down 16. All right, let's see what that does. Okay, so it did move the second row down 16, but we have a problem. It moved it down 16, but it didn't move it back to where we started. We need these ducks to be below the first ducks. We need it to go back to where it started, which means we need it to change the Y position like we did, but when this row of 7 changes, we need the X position to go back to the original X position. So how do we set the X position to go back to the way it was before? We don't use the change block. We use the set block this time. Set is basically like resetting. So down here, where I put the change Y position, I'm going to put the change X position. I'm going to put it back to 8, to a starting number. So I'm setting it back to 8. Whoa, look at the code. And now I have my 28 ducks in a row. We got all our ducks in a row. I did not plan that pun. I didn't. I promise I didn't. That's funny. All right, so congratulations. You used logic to, I'm sorry, not logic. You used loops to get all your ducks in a row. All right, so we have the beginning here of what could potentially be a pretty cool Space Invaders or Galaga type game. This is pretty neat. And we were able to do it without a lot of extra code. Yes, you might think, okay, creating these variables was a little bit of work. Sure, but we didn't have to create 28 different sprites and figure out the X and Y position of each and every single one, right? If I asked you what is the X and Y position of this duck right here, you don't know because you don't have to know. The computer figured it all out when they added those numbers for us, right? So let's say if I wanted to turn this into a real game though, like Galaga or Space Invaders, we're going to do a little extra work now, okay? So feel free, if this is all you wanted to learn, you could stop here. I want to play with it a little bit more, and I want to actually start building it into a game. So I'm going to save my work first off. Whenever you do something successfully and you know you're about to start making changes to it, it's a good idea to do a manual save, right? So what I want to do is I want these ducks to now start moving around the screen like they would in a game like Space Invaders or Galaga. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the set block, and after it creates the ducks and it sets their position, I want it to also give them a velocity. So they move. I want them to move to the right. So that's a velocity in the X direction. And I'm going to pick a speed for them. Let's say 20. I don't want them to move too fast. So, yep, they're moving now. And then they get to the edge and they go off the screen. I don't want them to do that. So I'm going to go to sprites. I'm going to go down here to the on-off switches. I'm moving a little fast because this is stuff that I'm just kind of throwing together real quickly here. This is not part of the lesson. So I have them now bouncing off the walls. And this is actually the beginning of a pretty decent game. I could leave it like that if I wanted to. That's not bad. And then to make it an actual game, all I have to do now is create my player character, right? I can go in here. I can grab one of these pre-made ships. I'm just doing this quickly. I can throw it down at the bottom of the screen. Oh, make sure the name matches. This would be a good time to actually rename my stuff. So let's rename this guy as ship. Rename this one as ducks. Notice I'm doing rename. I'm not creating a new variable because that's going to make it easier for me. All right. I want him to be in the middle of the screen. So the middle of the X position, remember the whole width is 160. So the middle would be 80. And I want it to be down near the bottom. The very bottom is 120. I'm going to go a little bit higher than that. So let's do 110. So now the ship should be at the bottom. There it is. I want it to have movement controls. So we'll put that in there for the ship. And right now he moves in all 4 directions. I don't want that. I just want him moving left and right. So I'm going to set the Y to 0 and leave the X. I want him to be able to shoot. So I'm going to grab an on A button press. I'm going to put a projectile in there just like we learned about in previous videos. And I want to shoot from the ship. I'm doing this fast, like I said, because this is stuff we covered in other videos. And we're going to make it look like a little yellow laser. And then I can pick the direction and the speed. I only want to shoot up. So that means I'll need a 0 for the Vx and leave Vy as a negative number because it's going to be shooting up. So let's do negative 50. There we go. So does it still work? Yep, I got it shooting. But of course, nothing's happening because I still have to create the overlap code. I'll let you guys do that. But yeah, I have the beginning here of a pretty decent game. And I can create an overlap code to make them do something when they get shot. And I could get points, and I could add all that if I wanted to. Okay, so I have here a pretty good use of loops, and I have the beginning of a pretty cool little projectile game. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you didn't find it too complicated. The basic takeaway for this is just to understand that loops create simplified coding solutions when you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. It can save you a lot of time. It can save you a lot of coding work. So if you enjoyed today's lesson, if you learned something new, please click that like button. If you decide to use this to build a game, please share that game with me by clicking on the share icon. Name your game, hit share project, copy the link, and put it in the comments of this video. I would love to see what you make, and I would love to play your games. So for now, this will be the end of this video, and I hope to see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and please let your friends and family know about this channel so that they can work along with us and create their own fun video games. Until next time.